we go outside to watch some actual landings, we're going to have a little discussion of the subject right here. Now, this subject is compulsory on account of an ugly scientific rumor that says what goes up must come down. And in flying, we're very particular how you come down. Mr. Blake, how would you define a landing?
Well, sir, a landing... But anyone knows what a landing is.
Sure, but what is your conception of the maneuver?
A landing is a mechanical process of getting an airplane down on the required 3 points. That's all.
That's about what everyone thinks it is. Just getting a plane onto the ground. Well, forget it. Get rid of that idea right now. Because in our business, a landing is much more than that. A landing is a series of events, important events, that starts up there before you enter traffic and ends after you have your plane on the ground and have safely cleared your landing area. The actual landing is only one step, and the result depends upon all the steps. And each step is important because it affects your arrival on the ground. Now, landings are made at every field in a prescribed area according to a traffic pattern. Now, these traffic patterns vary at different fields according to their sizes and local conditions. But generally, at every field, the pattern is rectangular. Now, let's assume that the wind is blowing in this direction. Here's your T. This is your landing mat. Now, your flight path with this particular T setting will look like this. A 180-degree downwind leg parallel to the T, a base leg at 90 degrees to the T, and a landing leg into the wind also parallel to the T. Now, regardless of your T setting, you'll find that this same rectangular pattern will apply. For example, if your wind is in this direction, just establish the landing leg and then add the other sides of the rectangle, just so that none of the pattern passes over a restricted area. Now, just as in primary, traffic around our particular field is based on this rectangular pattern, with landings made in the same direction that the T is headed, into the wind. You enter traffic up here at traffic altitude, coming into your downwind leg at a 45-degree angle, anywhere along the downwind half of your leg. Turn into your selected base leg, cut your gun here, and make a smooth turn into your chosen landing lane. Now, once in traffic, there are 5 factors to be considered in making an accuracy approach. Altitude, airspeed, base leg, key point, and the effect of wind. Now, the first 2, altitude and airspeed, require no planning on the part of the pilot because they're standardized procedures. Your altitude in traffic will always be 700 feet above the ground. And your best airspeed in the BT-13 is approximately 105 miles per hour, which can be achieved by a constant throttle setting of about 2,000 RPM. Now, that's for the BT-13 and will vary with other types of aircraft. But it's important that your airspeed is maintained at a constant in traffic. Now, the next 2, base leg and key point, are the ones we really have to work with to achieve accuracy. The position of the base leg depends upon the direction and velocity of the wind. Now, under normal conditions, we always land directly into the wind and in the first third of the field. Obviously, with a strong wind, the base leg should be closer into the field. And with a lighter wind, it should be farther away from the field. Now, the position of the key point, that point at which the throttle is cut, is an important factor which calls for some nice timing and judgment. Generally speaking, the key point is about 45 degrees to the landing spot and will allow time for the dissipation of airspeed, the establishment of the normal glide, and making the gliding turn. But this 45-degree angle is an approximation at best because we do vary the position of the key point to correct for errors in the placement of the base leg. For example, suppose your base leg is set too close into the field. You can correct it by moving your key point farther back. Or, if your base leg is too far away from the field, you correct it by making your key point a little closer in. However, there's a limit to all this. You cannot have your key point so close that you don't have time to dissipate your airspeed, establish your normal glide, and make your gliding turn. And on the other hand, it mustn't be so far away that your turn will be made at a dangerously low altitude. Well, these things, of course, are fundamentals which you all should already know. But to use them properly is a test of your ability as pilots. Moreover, the good pilot tries to avoid making the same mistake twice. Now, you can avoid repeating mistakes in approach by bracketing. That is to say, if you overshoot on your first try, then make a definite correction, even at the risk of undershooting slightly on your second attempt. This gives you two extremes to judge a middle path by, if necessary. Now, the last factor, wind, is something over which we have no control. But the pilot can allow for the effect of wind. And we've already seen that wind affects the position of the base leg and the key point. But in addition, the pilot must crab on his base leg so that his track over the ground is 90 degrees to the landing leg. Now, the importance of maintaining a base leg at 90 degrees to the landing leg cannot be overemphasized. And the pilot who allows his plane to drift simply adds one more factor which will impair the accuracy of his landing. Now, a wind 180 degrees to the landing leg, such as we've been discussing, is relatively easy to handle. However, a crosswind introduces many new problems. A strong crosswind, for example, will affect the placing of the key point. As you can see, a strong crosswind from this direction is in effect a partial headwind and will force us to move the key point a little closer in. In the same manner, a strong crosswind from this direction is in effect a partial tailwind, and we'll have to move our key point a little farther back. But the most important problem in handling crosswinds properly is on the final approach and the actual landing. It is most important that you correct for drift on the final approach so that your landing leg is parallel to the tee. If you don't correct for drift, obviously you'll be carried off to one side of your proper landing lane. And worse still, if you land while drifting, you place a sideways stress on the gear for which it is not designed. Moreover, if you hit the ground with drift on, the ship will tend to ground loop into the wind due to the windmilling effect of the crosswind on the ship. This difficulty must be overcome by one of three methods of drift correction: crab, slip, or a combination of the two. However, don't forget that the correction must be taken off just before the ship contacts the ground. In crabbing, just before the ship contacts the ground, you apply sufficient downwind rudder to straighten the ship out and enough opposite aileron to hold your wings level. Slipping is a slightly different problem. Here we hold a wing down into the wind with aileron, at the same time holding the fuselage parallel with the runway by the use of slight top rudder. Just before the plane contacts the ground, the wings are leveled. The third method is recommended in very strong crosswinds and in larger aircraft. As you see, it is a combination of crab and slip. Here again, the wings must be leveled and the fuselage must be parallel to the runway when the ship contacts the ground. Well, that takes care of that. I think you all understand it. However, are there any questions? Okay. Now let's see what the whole thing looks like from upstairs. This is one job where you start at the top. There's your field. You fly over it about 500 feet above traffic to determine conditions. Right away, you spot the T setting for direction of landing. And notice the direction of planes already in traffic. You then fly away from the field, checking gas and mixture control as you do so. Work into the wind. Let down. S-ing so as to see beneath you. Heading generally toward the field so as to avoid cutting out of the ships. Be sure that you clear yourself in all directions, especially ahead and beneath. Keep your eyes open. Don't crowd other aircraft and run the risk of a collision. As you let down, change prop to high RPM about 1,000 feet above the ground. Be sure the throttle's cracked enough to keep the engine warm. Level out and approach the field at 700 feet above the ground. Now here you are, heading into the last half of your downwind leg at a 45-degree angle. First thing you do is to spot other planes in traffic. Remember, they have the right of way. What's more, you've got to know how many there are and where they are all the time. While you're spotting other planes, carry out proper cockpit procedure. In the BT-13, roll down about 20 degrees of flaps for greater stability at reduced speed in traffic. You mustn't roll down your flaps above 120 or you'll damage them. When your airspeed has fallen to about 110 miles per hour, open your throttle to your traffic RPM and retrim the ship for this reduced airspeed. Now for your turn into the downwind leg. But get this, never turn without looking around for other planes. This is really the place to keep your eyes open. Be sure you're clear on both sides. Look around and keep looking around. You're on your downwind leg, picking your landing area and estimating your wind velocity and drift and figuring where to set your base leg. You make a smooth turn onto your base leg. Figure out where to set your key point. Here's your key point. So cut your gun and lose excess speed, at the same time holding your altitude. Now lower your nose and establish a definite glide. Then a smooth gliding turn into the landing leg. Also, when you roll out of that last turn, figure how much you'll have to change the angle of descent to hit your landing spot. So roll down as many additional degrees of flaps as you need to shorten your approach. Flaps are provided to increase the angle of descent. And lower your nose accordingly to keep normal approach gliding speed. The more flaps, the lower the nose. Your normal landing is nothing but a stall at ground level. You cannot force it, so don't ever try. All you can do is to break your glide in such a manner that with smooth, gradual back pressure on the stick, you can have the ship in a three-point landing attitude just above the ground when the stall does occur. You needn't worry. When the ship loses its flying speed, it will settle of its own accord. And, providing you've broken your glide properly, ride down on 3 points, just as when you're taxiing. When you're down, hug that stick back into your guts and keep her rolling straight. Your landing's not complete until your wheels stop rolling. Take a good look behind you, then with your last bit of speed, turn to clear the field. Roll up your flaps and retrim for takeoff, then clear the field as quickly as you can. And how important are all these points? Well, it's easy to find out. Let's take the case of this lad who was too hurried to trim his ship. If he had been at all sharp, he'd have realized that there was no gremlin pushing forward on his stick when he cut that throttle. But not him. To make matters worse, he figured it'd be unsafe to oppose all that stick pressure. So regardless of attitude, he swept around his turn and he made his landing all right. Quite definitely wheels first. He walked away from it, but this is what he left behind. Now let's see what happens to the man who forgets to look around. This ex-fullback forgot, and when he turned into his landing leg, he didn't see that ship below, right in his lane. He doesn't have longitudinal clearance, but it doesn't seem to bother this bird. He doesn't know he's there because he didn't clear himself. He's going on, head down, right through the center of the line. But the center holds, and our hero is carried from the field. The trouble is, the other man was carried off too. Now, what's that other item you need time for after cutting the gun?
Planning ahead for that 90-degree turn.
That's right. And remember, it should be medium banked and positive, a safe gliding turn. That means there's only one place to start it. Now here's a pilot going beyond the right spot. Let's take a look at him. Dreaming when he should be planning. And he wakes up too late. He sees he's past the right point to turn and, hey, what's he trying to do? He's forcing the turn. He can't do that and get away with it. Not often, anyway.
Sir, exactly what happened when he forced that gliding turn?
Centrifugal force added to the ship's weight overloaded the wings. She stalled, and his altitude wasn't exactly ideal for recovery. You just can't force a gliding turn. And even if you're lucky enough to get away with it, you've overshot your landing lane. And if you try to S back, you might cut out someone behind you. It's all around bad. Now let's take a squint at this jughead. He's turned onto his landing leg, but look at him. He hasn't dropped his nose an inch. Unless you lower the nose when you roll down additional flaps, the plane will lower its own nose, but quickly and permanently. In breaking the glide at the right time and place, here's a tip. Doing it right will depend a good deal on how much you look around. If your gaze is fixed right down in front of the plane, the tendency is to fly into the ground. If, on the other hand, your gaze is fixed too far out in front, you will probably level off high. As for keeping the stick back in your guts when you're down and holding a straight course until your wheels stop rolling, I shouldn't have to tell you what'll happen if you don't. But here's a stoop that can do him one better. He's slowing down. Now he's turning with his last little bit of speed. He didn't look before he turned, so he probably won't look now. He's too busy enjoying the turning wheels as he rolls up his flaps and retrims his ship. He's clearing the field, or is he? Why doesn't he see that ship heading right for him? He does, but too late. On go the brakes, up on his nose. And there it is. For your information, gentlemen, Lady Luck was just watching out for the other fella. Well, I guess that covers about all the steps. Are there any questions? All right, then we'll move on outside and see what we can pick up by watching traffic for a while. Now, let's sit down here, gentlemen, where we can get a good view of what's going on. I'd like to analyze some of these approaches and landings for you. Now, let's watch this plane just about to land. Now, what was the matter with that landing?
Sir, he seemed to drop in pretty hard.
Well, he managed to get it down pretty much on 3 points, didn't he? What's bad about that?
Well, that's hard on the ship.
That's right. And it could have been a lot worse. He just leveled off too high, which means that he stalled in from about 10 feet. He was probably concentrating way too far ahead of the plane. He could very easily have dragged a wing or even washed out a landing gear. Now, let's take him back to where he was leveling off and see what he should have done. The proper procedure is to add power to break the possible stall and reestablish the glide. Then, if necessary, ease forward on the stick a little before breaking the reestablished glide for your 3-point landing.
Sir, what about that ship?
He's not breaking his glide soon enough. Probably staring the ground right down in front of the ship. He's not going to get the tail down. There, he hit wheels first. Look at him bounce. Once, twice, and again. Looks like a roller coaster. I told you back there in the flight room about that kind of approach in low turns. See what I meant? But what about that landing?
Well, sir, you said he didn't break his glide soon enough.
Yes, I did, but what about all those bounces? Now, let's take him back to that first bounce and see if we can't eliminate the jackrabbit technique. When his wheels strike the ground here, he's easing back on the stick, breaking his glide. Together with the bounce, this back pressure sends him zooming up in the air, where he reacts to keep from stalling by shoving forward on the stick. Towards the ground he goes. So his reactions are again back on the stick to get the tail down, but again too late. So up he goes, same as before. His reactions throughout are just behind the ship. Now here's what he should do. After his wheels first hit, he should hold what control pressure he has. This will reduce the tendency to zoom. Then from the top of his bounce, he should again start breaking his glide for a 3-point landing. Use of power depends on the height of the bounce, same as in leveling off too high. Now, he used his head. He saw he was going to land pretty long. Might have gone through the fence, so he gave it the gun. Which brings up another good point. It's never wrong to give it the gun and go around again if you're in doubt about your landing. Whether it's because of a bad bounce, another plane ahead of you, landing long, overshooting, undershooting, or anything else. Just don't wait too long in making up your mind. And the procedure's important, too, particularly in the case of last-minute decisions. Open your throttle wide to build up flying speed. Trim the ship immediately to relieve all that back pressure due to the trim for glide. Roll up all except 20 degrees of flaps, but not too fast, because reducing flaps reduces the angle of attack, which in turn reduces lift. Then finally, after your flaps are up, establish your normal climb, and don't try to gain any more altitude than is absolutely necessary to clear any obstacles safely until you get your flaps up.
Well, sir, what about that ship? The pilot's obviously undershooting.
Well, what should he do?
Go around?
Well, that's not bad, but supposing his engine were missing, he didn't want to risk going around the field again. What would you do?
Drag her in with power, sir?
Yes, and he'd better start right now or he'll... Ah, just in time, practically climbing over the fence.
Sir, it looks like he was really trying to stretch his glide.
Yes, he waited way too long to gun it, and then was never able to settle down and reestablish his glide. That's what usually happens when you're indecisive. He should have gone into a power approach way back there when he first saw there was any possibility of undershooting.
Power approach? Sir, what do you mean by that?
That's right, I haven't explained the power approach, have I? Well, as the name implies, it is any approach to a landing using power. The normal power approach deliberately sets out to demand the use of power to bring a ship into landing position. Of course, this means that the base leg must be moved back from the field, about half again as far in the usual power approach. The actual landing is made in the normal manner, after cutting your gun at the point where you break your glide.
Sir, do you mean that the only difference between the normal intentional power approach and the use of power to correct for undershooting is the time you start to use power?
That's right. Go into this power approach anytime you see you're undershooting, even if it's before your final turn. Don't ever hesitate to use your throttle. Just don't be too slow in making up your mind. Well, that's all I have for you right now, gentlemen.
What about you, Pip? Think you can get her down in one piece?
Well, I'm all set for my solo landings right now. It's as easy as coming downstairs.
Yeah, but don't miss a step on the way.
I'll bet you a Coke I don't miss a one.
You're on. I should have made it a steak dinner.
Oh.
Now, you haven't a thing to worry about in your solo, provided you don't forget anything I've told you. Okay, it's all yours.
Well, I haven't forgotten a thing so far. I've checked my gas and mixture. Here I'm heading towards my downwind leg. And now I let down at about 1,000 feet above the ground. Change prop to high RPM. Throttle is cracked enough to keep the engine warm. Level out at traffic altitude and lose speed to traffic cruising. Under 120. Roll down flaps to 20 degrees. She's down to traffic cruising speed. Open throttle to about 2,000 RPM. Trim ship. Look around. Keep looking around. Now a good, smooth turn into my downwind leg. Easy does it. This is like falling off a log. Now straighten out. Here I am on my downwind leg. How am I doing, Lieutenant?
He's going along fine in his downwind leg. He spotted that other plane in front of him, I hope.
Wind about 10 miles. Grip correction about 5 degrees. So, set base leg there. Again, look behind and make a nice medium turn into my base leg. That's it.
Base leg looks okay. Certainly hope he spotted that other plane, though.
Don't worry, Lieutenant, I see him, and I'll give him plenty of room. I'll have to put my key point a little early so that I can turn inside of him and land to his left. be long now. Key point coming up. Landing spot okay. Lane clear, field open. Here's the key point, so cut throttle. And lose all flying speed in excess of gliding speed. Don't lose any altitude, though. Now lower the nose for a nice, easy glide. That'll bring her straight in on the nose. Every step a winner. Get that Coke ready, Pop.
Now he's rolling down more flaps.
Let the nose down a little. Keep a good, solid glide. Better watch that other plane, though. Yep, I'm okay. I'm far enough over.
Nice gliding angle. Breaking his glide about right. Easing her back gently now, just holding her off, getting the attitude, letting her land herself. Right down on 3 points. Okay. Rolling along straight. Gradually losing speed.
Look behind carefully. Then with last little bit of speed, turn about 45 degrees.
Staying in his lane. Still looking behind him, he's rolling up his flaps. He should be retrimming his ship for takeoff. And there he's clearing the field. Well, he brought it down in one piece. Okay, Mr. Blake. You did a pretty good job. You had me worried. I didn't think you saw that other ship.
I saw him all the time, sir. You've been pounding that book around so much that I do it in my sleep.
See that you keep it up. It's the best habit you can develop. Jap Zeros aren't going to come up and tap on your canopy before they get on your tail, you know. All right, Mr. Samuel. Let's see what you can do.
How about that Coke, Pop? My boy, as Lieutenant Carter said, landings are as easy as coming downstairs. You just have to watch each step.
You should have pulled the ripcord, Pip.